I'm going to start this appendix chapter with 2 books and a movie. I'll start with this hidden gem of a movie starring Chris Cooper and Chris Christopherson. It holds the dynamic of war, of emotions, really so well. It's set in the Civil War. It's not overly violent, but it really portrays the emotions so well of that part of our history, as well as the hypocrisy and the dynamic of love and war, I think, possibly as well as any movie. The first book I want to feature is Empire of the Summer Moon, about the life of Quanah Parker, the great Comanche chief who was the son of a white woman who had been captured by the Comanches at the age of 9 and then married a Comanche chief. And it's absolutely the best book on the entire dynamic of the West, of the whites coming west, my ancestors from both sides coming west, and then the terrible fights, but also on the Native Americans and all of the different tribes and how different they were. The one thing that I need to tell you to do is just be ready for the brutality, and the guy doesn't hold back on the terrible brutality that the Comanche were, the whites as well, but the Comanche in many cases were inflicting on not only on whites but on the other tribes that they conquered. The Tonkawas, the Apaches especially. So that was just part of it. You'll have to just be ready for that. Skip over it or just read through it, and it's the only book I've ever read 3 times. I'm finishing it for the 3rd time. The only other book that I read 3 times was Legacy of Ashes, about it's a history of the CIA. Then the other book I want to feature is called Daughters of Kobani, and it's about the absolutely courageous and fierce Kurdish women who fought ISIS to a standstill with automatic weapons, eventually leading entire troops, both men and women, in northern Syria. The Kurdish people, of course, are spread over 3 major countries: Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, and possibly Iran. And they have not, of course, been able to create Kurdistan as a country. But this book says everything to me about what the young girls, should be reading in places like Afghanistan and Iran. Here's an excerpt from the audiobook. The author is talking about the Kurdish women, these combatants, going through the streets of a city where they just defeated ISIS.
Kept greeting the YPJ fighters as they made their way toward the center, clearing Manbij of ISIS. Mothers and daughters especially would come out into the streets. The women from Manbij would stare at them, talk with them, and sometimes hug them wordlessly, their embraces expressing more than words could about just how much they had witnessed and suffered. Znareen realized how strange it must have been for women in these villages to see female soldiers come through with braids and ponytails, carrying rifles and dressed in camouflage. It was strange enough for the Kurdish families to whom these women belonged. Znareen snapped her mind back to the moment and looked at this reed of a girl standing before her, wearing a niqab, a black veil that covered all of her face except her eyes. The girl had been savvy enough to make it this far, past 2 of the young women pulling security at the entrance to their makeshift base camp. "Salam alaikum," Znareen said to the girl. "How can I help you?" The girl spoke in barely a whisper. Znarine could see how much courage it had required for her to come here. I wanted to find out how I could join you. As Znarine looked at the girl, she understood her. Of course this girl could not yet join them. She didn't look nearly old enough, and her family would have a say in her decision. But Znarine would not be one more person in her life who told her no. Well, we would be very glad to have you and all the other girls in the village who would want to join us, Znarine said. Maybe we could talk to your father and mother about coming to us when you are ready. We'd be very happy to have a girl as brave as you with us. The girl still did not meet Znarine's gaze, but her eyes communicated everything. They lit up and shone with a glimmer of what might be possible. The girl nodded and said little more. She didn't even give her name. But while she walked away, she turned to wave, and even raised her eyes to meet those of Znarine, who thought about her for a very long time afterward.
Death ain't such a big deal. Just dying is no goddamn fun.
Hey, Millennials. I guess hell has frozen over and you're actually watching one of my memoir videos. I've got a problem with youans. The plural you, I refuse to use y'all. When I send out an email to boomers, usually on issues that we were both involved in or interested in, like climate restoration, and I write, here is a really good review of ocean iron fertilization and climate restoration. Ocean iron fertilization is about fertilizing the phytoplankton, which I have shown here. 90% of the time from boomers, I get a reply, sometimes just okay or thanks, sometimes a couple of sentences. Millennials, it's less than 10% of the time I get even a okay or thanks or something. Got it. And it's always something that is of interest to them, such as a book recommendation or a website. And so can you explain, or a based on true life movie on the Cambridge Five, the British Cambridge Five's communist spies who were at the very top level of MI, the British intelligence agency? Philby, Burgess, and Maclean. Because they came from aristocratic backgrounds, or at least had gone to the university, Cambridge, that gave them that status, MI5 leadership just assumed that they would be loyal British intelligence agents, despite the fact that Cambridge was, in the 1930s, when they were there, rife with communist-leaning people. Their story is made for a miniseries. They were brazen. They worked in Washington, D.C. at the very top level of security, and they had access to the very top military secret, which they fed, I can't remember which one, two, or all three, but they fed this intelligence to Stalin. The head of counterintelligence for the CIA back then in early 1950s was James Angleton. Well, the task of counterintelligence is to find and dig out the spies who might be within the system. Well, his drinking buddy was none other than Kim Philby, the MI5 spy who was feeding information to Stalin. There are other stories. There was a very high-level Soviet general who wanted to defect, and he was ready to give all sorts of intelligence. But since the KGB and Stalin were very, very skilled at setting up double agents, and they needed to vet this guy. And who did they put on this case of this very high-level general? Kim Philby. And so the Soviet general disappeared. He was arrested and executed and disappeared. Korean War. And the British spies were devastatingly effective. Because of the information provided by these three spies, Peking and Moscow knew that they were fighting an almost risk-free war. Mao Zedong had known all of the limitations placed on the UN forces. Everything from no nationalist Chinese attacks on Red China, no hot pursuit across the river that divides China and Korea, no bridges, no strikes against dams or power plants or those bridges, all targets in Manchuria and China off limits, the date and order of battle for the offensive, and no economic blockade, and finally, no risk of the atomic bomb. They knew that Truman was not going to use the atomic bomb. Lin Biao, one of the Chinese commanders, specifically said I would never have made the attack and risked my men and military reputation if I had not been assured that Washington would restrain General MacArthur from taking adequate retaliatory measures against my lines of supply and communication. Because of the information provided by these three spies, Peking and Moscow knew that they were fighting an almost risk-free war. And so this, of course, needs to be vetted. I'm just tossing this out because it's just part of my reading, but it's way past time to do a mini-series on this because it may very well be that North Korea exists because of these British communist spies that were very high up in MI5, the British intelligence service, and had access in Washington, D.C. to the very highest military intelligence. So that's just a little pet peeve of mine. I'm glad I was able to get it in. I think it was the late Jerry Rubin, the 60s guy, one of the Chicago 8 or something fame from the 60s, who said, yeah, every day I do this little exercise called getting my yayas out. He wrote that. I don't know where I read it. It might have been in one of the alternative papers way back. But he said, I like to get my yayas out. I put my feet on the ground and my fists on my bed. And I put my head, lean my head all the way over and then completely relax. This is how I do it. And then you bend your knees and you get on the balls of your feet with your heels off the ground. And then you bounce. You bounce yourself. And it's really good for you. And I think for all those people who don't jog, I think one of the real benefits of jogging, after, of course, cardiovascular part, is joggling yourself. That is with an L in there. I think in yesterday's New York Times, I saw a headline saying, even a short jog is really good for you. It's benefit for the health. Someone takes a 10-minute jog, and then other people just walk or do sedentary exercise, and they find that jogging is good. And I think the joggling of, get this, once again, going to the microbiome, the intestinal flora, they like it. They like being joggled around, and it's good for your muscles. It's good for your stomach. You have to relax, put your head all the way down, hang it down. Your fists are holding a lot of your weight, and just bounce up and down, okay? Getting your yayas out. Come on, stand up and breathe. You're doing well, Lauder. Doing well. Stir that gruel. Stand up straight. Breathe. Man, doing well. Doing well. Okay. Breathe into your stomach. All right. That's started. Okay. Privet is known as a relentless invader in California, invasive plant. I would like to make the case here that keeping a few mature trees that have seed will allow birds to survive the cold months of January and February. The seed of privet hangs on to the trees even through the fiercest winter storms and that north wind that we have here that blows everything down. All the other seed rot and go to the ground, and birds can be seen during January and February. Many species of birds I've seen feeding on the privet seed. So here's my case for that. You can see the white-crowned sparrows sitting up there in that privet tree. That privet is a tree now, and it's full of seed